Picture this. Dayton, Ohio, 1974. A 37-year-old machinist named Frank walks off second shift at the GM plant, still smelling like cutting fluid and metal shavings, and instead of going inside, he pulls open the side door to his one-car garage. There are two broken lawn mowers, a neighbor's chainsaw, and a hand-painted sign leaning against the wall that says "Small Engine Repair, Cheap." Frank is about to make more money in that garage on Saturday morning than most people in his neighborhood made in a full week. And he never once called it a side hustle. To understand why 1974 was the perfect year for this, you have to feel the economic pressure that year. The United States was running an inflation rate of around 11%. Unemployment was climbing towards 7.2% by year's end, and the 1973 oil embargo had already doubled gasoline prices. People were holding on to older cars and older equipment instead of replacing them, because new stuff had gotten expensive fast. That combination created a very specific kind of demand, broken things that needed fixing, and people who could not afford to pay dealership prices to fix them. Here is the wage reality Frank was living inside. A skilled tradesman in 1974 earned somewhere between $4.50 and $6 an hour. At $5 an hour, 40 hours a week, Frank was bringing home roughly $860 a month before taxes. The median family income that year was about $11,100 annually, which works out to around $925 a month. So when I tell you Frank was targeting an extra $400 a month from his garage, I want you to understand what that number actually meant. That was nearly half his paycheck, stacked on top, in cash. Now let's talk about where Frank's skill set actually came from, because this is one of the things people get wrong about this era. They assume these garage operators were some kind of rare mechanical genius. They were not. Frank learned basic engine work from his father, who had kept a tractor running on a farm outside of Xenia for 30 years. He picked up the rest in a night course at a local community college in 1972, specifically marketed as a way to earn extra income at home. Community colleges and vocational schools around 1970 to 1975 were actively pitching small engine repair courses as a path to part-time cash. Frank paid about $40 for the course and walked away with the confidence to take money for work he had already been doing for free. By the spring of 1974, Frank had a simple operation running out of his single-car garage. He focused on lawn mowers, chainsaws, and snowblowers, which was smart, because Dayton suburbs were full of them. The 1974 Sears catalog listed dozens of gas-powered mowers and snowblowers, and by that point millions of suburban households owned equipment that was years out of warranty. Dealerships and big equipment shops were not interested in a $12 tune-up job. That indifference was Frank's entire business model. He charged $8 for a basic mower tune-up and $15 for a full overhaul. The dealer down the road was charging $20 and up just for the tune-up. Let's run the actual math, because this is where it gets real. In a typical month, Frank did about 10 to 12 mower tune-ups at $8 to $10 each. That alone was $80 to $120. But the bigger money came from the overhauls and the occasional snowblower rebuild, which he charged $25 to $40 for. Do 3 or 4 of those in a month, and you are already looking at another $100. Add in a chainsaw repair here, a tiller carburetor job there, and by the time Frank tallied up a Saturday afternoon in May, he was often clearing $300 to $400 in a single month without touching a car. Here is something that surprises people when they first hear it. Frank's advertising budget was essentially zero. He had a hand-painted sign on his fence facing the street that said "Tune UPS," cheap, with his phone number. He had a stack of index cards pinned to the bulletin board at the hardware store on Wilmington Pike and another one at the laundromat 2 blocks over. That was it. No yellow pages listing, no newspaper classified, no flyers in mailboxes. His first 10 customers came from those 2 index cards and one neighbor who told another neighbor. By the second summer, he had a wait list of 3 weeks in May and June. They did not have apps. They had resourcefulness. Now, Frank was not the only guy doing this. Across the country in the early to mid-1970s, a parallel version of this hustle was running in driveways and garages in the form of the Shade Tree Mechanic. A mid-1970s regional newspaper feature profiled a backyard mechanic who was servicing neighbors' cars for half the shop rate. He charged $35 for a brake job at a time when the dealer was charging $60 to $90. He charged $20 for a tune-up and $10 for an oil change, parts extra. He described doing 2 or 3 jobs a week around his factory schedule. At 2 brake jobs and 2 tune-ups per week, that mechanic was pulling in roughly $220 to $240 a month in labor alone, before any parts markup. One of the most counterintuitive facts about this era is how legal most of this was, or at least how tolerated it was. In 1974, most states did not require a special license just to do auto repair or small engine work, especially if you were not advertising as a formal business. Local zoning ordinances in many post-war suburbs either lightly restricted home-based repair work or simply did not enforce the rules as long as you were not stacking junked cars in the front yard or running an air compressor at midnight. Neighbors generally looked the other way if the guy was quiet, kept his yard clean, and charged them half what the shop down the road did. The regulatory environment was genuinely looser, and that mattered. There is also a barter dimension to this story that almost never gets mentioned. In smaller towns and tight neighborhoods, cash was not always the currency. Frank occasionally traded a mower repair for a cord of firewood from a guy with land outside the city. A neighbor who ran a small butcher shop brought him a roast in exchange for fixing a chest freezer motor. Another man helped Frank pour a new concrete pad in the garage in exchange for 2 seasons of free tune-ups. This was not charity, and it was not informal. It was a calculated exchange between people who understood the value of each other's labor. Barter was culturally normal in 1974 in a way that feels almost foreign to talk about today. The equipment question is worth addressing directly, because it is the objection Frank's neighbors raised when he first started. A decent arc welder in 1974 cost between $200 and $300, which was roughly a third of a month's wages for a skilled worker. A compressor, a floor jack, a good set of hand tools. You could easily spend $400 to $500 getting set up properly. That was real money. But here is the thing Frank understood that his neighbors missed. That equipment did not wear out in a season. It lasted 10, 15, 20 years. The upfront cost was also what kept competition thin. Not everyone could swallow a $300 equipment bill in 1974, and that kept Frank's waiting list full. There was a third tier to this garage economy that Frank had his eye on, but had not fully built out yet: fabrication. Popular Mechanics ran an article in 1972 describing a home shop welder who built utility trailers in his garage and sold them to local farmers and contractors. His profit after materials was $40 to $60 per trailer, and he was building 2 or 3 a month on the side. That is $100 to $150 a month from one product, and it stacked on top of repair income without requiring much extra time. Frank knew a guy in his neighborhood doing exactly this with welded steel tool racks for pickup trucks. The fabrication path was always there for anyone willing to take the next step. Let's put the $400 figure in real perspective, because I think people underestimate it. $400 a month in 1974 was enough to cover a full mortgage payment on a new home. The average new home price that year was around $36,000. And monthly payments on a standard mortgage were often under $300. Frank's garage income was not just spending money. It was a financial cushion that could absorb a car repair, a medical bill, or a slow month at the plant without the family going into debt. Adjusted for inflation, $400 in 1974 is roughly $2,300 to $2,400 a month in today's money. Think about what that number means to someone working a warehouse job right now. Here is the misconception I want to push back on directly, because I hear it every time I cover this era. People say, everyone had stable jobs and pensions back then, nobody needed a side hustle. That is just wrong. Blue-collar side work in the 1970s was widespread. It just was not branded. It did not have a name. Frank did not call himself an entrepreneur. He called it making some extra on the side. The trades culture of the post-war era was built on the assumption that a man's skills belonged to him, not just to his employer, and that those skills could be rented out in the evenings and on weekends to whoever needed them. That mindset was not rare. It was the default in working-class neighborhoods from Ohio to Texas to Oregon. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, the environment that made Frank's garage so easy to run started tightening. Municipalities matured, zoning enforcement got stricter, and chains like Midas, Meineke, and Sears Auto began absorbing the casual repair market with advertising budgets Frank could never match. Environmental rules around used oil disposal and refrigerant handling became significantly more regulated through the 1980s and 1990s. The classic one-man garage shop did not disappear, but it went quieter. It got more specialized. The guys who survived the shift were the ones who had built loyal repeat customers, kept their operations clean and low profile, and focused on the work the chains refused to touch. So what does this actually mean for someone sitting in a mid-size American city in 2026 with a set of tools, a garage, and a skill set they have been giving away to their employer for 20 years? The business model Frank ran is not dead. It went quiet. Tools are cheaper and better relative to wages now than they were in 1974. A decent impact wrench, a compressor, or a small MIG welder often costs less than 1 week's take-home pay for a skilled trades worker today. And the demand side is arguably stronger, because labor shortages in the trades mean big shops are turning away small, annoying jobs every single day. That overflow is your entry point. The zoning and compliance picture is more complex now, but home occupation permits exist in most municipalities for exactly this kind of work. This one got buried, but it never stopped working. Frank's story is not a nostalgia piece. It is a template. He identified a skill gap in his neighborhood, priced himself below the nearest competitor, kept his overhead at nearly zero, and let word of mouth do the rest. He worked evenings and Saturdays. He never quit his day job. He never borrowed money to start. He just opened the garage door and let people know he was there. The principles are the same in 2026 as they were in 1974. The oil embargo is different, the zoning forms are different, the apps people use to find you are different. But the core transaction, a person with a skill solving a problem for a neighbor at a fair price, that has not changed once in 50 years. Your grandparents already solved this problem. We just stopped listening. If this video gave you one thing to actually do this week, here is what I want it to be. Write down the 3 skills you use at work that your neighbors would pay for if they knew you had them. Not a business plan, not a website, not a brand. Just 3 skills on a piece of paper. Frank did not start with a plan. He started with a carburetor and a neighbor who could not afford the dealer. If you found this useful, subscribe to the channel because we cover this kind of thing every week. The forgotten side hustles, the old school income strategies, and the angles that most money channels never touch. Drop a comment telling me what skill is sitting in your garage right now. I read every one of them.